Hello, everyone. Welcome to Research Talk's Qualitative Scholar Conversation Series. Today, we are honored to be talking to both Alana Gunn and Faith Fletcher, who will be teaching a course for us at our 21st Qualitative Research Summer Intensive. The title of that course is Advancing a Critical Ethics of Care in Research, Qualitative Inquiry and Intersectional Vulnerabilities. That course is offered August 2nd. And what we'll do today is talk with them a bit about that course, give you things about the course and the topic, both that you can't just capture from reading the course description. As many of you know, I'm Maietta, president of ResearchTalk. We started in 1996, and our real mission is just to facilitate the work of people who do qualitative inquiry, many deeply experienced across disciplines, across industry, and that's why we're happy to be partnering with the Odum Institute at UNC. My colleague Paul Mihas is here, and also my colleague Jeff Petruzzelli. So we'll be joining us for this conversation, and it's wonderful to share our mission of being able to facilitate the work people do with Alana and Faith. As you'll see very shortly and via their conversation, they are offering an element and a critical piece to what we should all hear, consider, and integrate in our own work. Paul, do you want to just give a brief introduction of yourself? We'll have Jeff do the same, and then we'll give the conversation over primarily to Alana and Faith with a little guidance and Q&A from us.
Thanks, Ray. I'm Paul Mihas. I'm the Assistant Director of Qualitative and Mixed Methods Research at the Odum Institute for Research and Social Science at UNC Chapel Hill. And I've also been with ResearchTalk since 2001 as a consultant.
Thank you, Paul. Jeff?
Hi, I'm Jeff Petruzzelli with ResearchTalk. Like Paul, I've been with ResearchTalk since 2001, and I am a qualitative research specialist here, and looking forward to today's conversation.
Thank you, Jeff. And we'll start off and we'll go back and forth. And I know the two of you work together a lot, so you have rhythm already established. So it doesn't matter to us who speaks first. The first question we'd love to hear from both of you, and the rest of them just kind of collectively, individually, whatever it takes for us to kind of learn what you want to put forward in conversation today. And we'd like to begin hearing just a little bit from each of you about yourself, and in particular, focus on your evolution as a qualitative researcher. And then after that, we'll move to a place where we'll be more in rhythm and flow, where we'll talk about the origins of the course, importance, things of that sort. So let's start off learning a little bit more about each of you. Whoever wants to begin is great. Thanks.
Sure. So I see myself as a community engaged, equity rooted researcher who really tries to foreground an understanding of how trauma and how disparity moves through the lives of many individuals who are navigating different kinds of marginalization. And so my disciplinary background is in social work. I've been a therapist, I've been a clinician, and I fall at that intersection between social work and criminology. And my work looks at how women who are navigating previous criminal justice involvement, as well as addiction and recovery, are managing various forms of stigma as they're re-entering back into the community, wanting to re-engage in their family, reactivate bonds, and really engage in the identity, identity work that's critical to recovery. And so my clinical work has led me to often partner with and do community organizing work with women with justice involvement, with families who've been impacted by incarceration and illness experiences, and how they overlap and intersect, and seeing the ways and partnering with communities facing these intersectional kind of marginalizations led me to really understand and see the power of voice, the power of amplifying one's lived experiences, and also the ways in which, the ways in which talk and research can be powerful. Yeah, it can be a powerful tool for recovery and transformation. And I've seen that in my research often. I got a chance to, I've had opportunities to engage in various kinds of projects. And the most recent one was as a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Fellow, where I worked with communities in the west side of Chicago, really trying to understand the ways in which incarceration and different forms of community and violence was shaping their mental health, even their access to health services, and even the ways in which they were engaging with their family and with their community. And it's these kinds of research, community-rooted experiences that really shaped my understanding of the power of research and the possibilities for advocacy. Yes.
Beautiful. And Alana, you're so this is Alana Gunn who's talking to us, and you're at University of Illinois, Chicago, right?
Yes, I'm an associate professor there. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's wonderful. Jeff and Paul and I are taking notes, and I can see how your background's fully prepared you for what we're talking about today and the course you're offering. It's wonderful. Hi, Faith.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. I'll just start a little bit about my background. I'm an associate professor currently in the Center for Medical Ethics and Health Policy at Baylor College of Medicine. So my sort of day-to-day work consists of teaching medical students. My work is also rooted in health equity, the intersection of health equity, public health, and bioethics. I would say thematically, my work centers around research and healthcare engagement with marginalized or minoritized populations. My work began with women living with HIV in the Deep South. So I very much use the framework of thinking about populations with intersectional vulnerabilities and resiliencies, thinking about how these identities intersect and impact people's engagement with research studies, with the research enterprise broadly, but as well as their healthcare engagement experiences. Currently, I use that information as a health equity, public health, and bioethics researcher, and I teach medical students, and the goal is to always hoping that they become more structurally competent and engage with patients with respect and equity, and really focus on building the culture of trustworthiness in research and healthcare.
Beautiful. Great. Thank you so much to both of you. When we think about the course, and again, advancing critical ethics of care and research with a particular focus on qualitative inquiry and intersectional vulnerabilities, can you let us know more about the origins, kind of why this course, and in so doing, feel free to do a little bit of what you've already laid wonderful groundwork for as you introduced yourselves, other experiences, written work that has informed that. But yeah, just tell us a little more about the origins and movement toward getting this course up and going.
Sure. You know, I really believe that Faith and I's interest in understanding the ethics and the power of qualitative research started way before we met each other. I would say, you know, when I was even working on my dissertation and writing different kind of publications, I was struck by the way the women in my research talked about their involvement with sex work and the ways in which they experience various kinds of traumas. And I was particularly struck by their use of the word prostitution. And I found myself very compelled to really be intentional with the kind of language I use in the papers that I produce, given the various layers and intersections of stigmatization that they're already experiencing and navigating. So it was early questions like that, that led me very quickly to think about, well, how are we engaging in research? How are we talking about our participants throughout the research inquiry process? How are we disseminating this kind of logic and this kind of understanding and their lived experiences? And so it's these kinds of questions that led me into a fellowship program, the Research Ethics Training Institute. It's a NIDA-funded project, fellowship, and it's hosted at Fordham University, where the PI is Fisher. And it was through my time there as a fellow, really digging into these ethical questions of how are we engaging in research, how are we being reflexive about our role in the research project, that led me to meet, befriend, and be in community with Dr. Fletcher. And so we quickly started thinking about the ways in which our work was intersecting, because we're very much, I think we very much intersect and have a commonality of interest, not just in health disparities, but the ways in which intersectional forms of systematic kind of marginalization shapes the way one engages in their health practices, navigates the world in various ways. And so realizing we had these interests quickly led us to think about ways to write papers. And then when we found this research institute and talked about it, we really saw the ways in which our work could provide like critical insights in a critical space for thinking through questions and tensions and complexities in really humble and courageous ways, you know? And so a lot of my work actually that ended up getting me tenure, I'll say that, has to do with the ethics of doing research and what does that look like for us to engage in research with communities that are navigating various forms of stigmas and various forms of trauma. And through my papers, I also talk about something that was really fascinating, the ways in which women with these various experiences of marginalization would talk through their lived experiences. And through talking through it, they were experiencing transformation. You know, I would hear women talk about, wow, this is the first time I've been able to talk about my past experiences in ways that felt therapeutic, that felt beneficial, that felt like it would help me, it would motivate me towards things I want to do in the future. And so that led me to think about the ways in which, although research is not therapy, the ways in which there's layers of it that can be therapeutic and can help one to transform in really healthy and well-being ways. But of course, that also requires us as the researcher to think about the place, the context, our intersectional forms of identity. So that's the kind of thinking and processing and reflecting that I have done in many of my papers. Yeah.
It's wonderful. I love this expression you just gave us, Alana, an opportunity to be humble and courageous. It's beautiful. And I just think it's encouraging that you're putting that language forward for people as they venture out and really consider what it is that the two of you are bringing to researchers. Yeah. Faith, I noticed as Alana was talking, you were giving wonderful, supportive, nonverbal, but something tells me your mind is also ready to share information with us.
Yeah, I think our paths, as Dr. Gunn mentioned, really began well before we met in the Research Ethics Training Institute. And in similar ways, I worked with HIV positive women or women living with HIV in the Deep South. And my early work, my dissertation work really centered around understanding their experiences of reproductive autonomy and engagement in healthcare. And it was through this work where I really started to think about ethical questions related to engaging, especially women living with HIV in the research process because of the stigma they experienced in daily life. Stigma within the healthcare system. I also learned that the stigma manifested and was also pervasive in the research process. So some of the things that I did not anticipate, for instance, was about interview locations. So I went to many women's homes and they disclosed to me that they weren't able to actually have these interviews in their home because they hadn't disclosed maybe their status to their partners or their housemates. So we ended up conducting a lot of my dissertation interviews in my car. And again, that was an unexpected or unanticipated ethical challenge So when I teach research ethics, and the framing around research ethics is that institutional review board IRB approval, it's just the floor. There's so much more that we need to do to be ethical and respectful in research. And we have to be very intentional as investigators about mitigating harm. And part of mitigating harm is to understand research complexities, to understand intersectional vulnerabilities and resiliencies of populations, and really taking this information and integrating it into larger, I would say braver and bolder research, qualitative research ethics models. So these are some of the things that we hope to talk about in our course. I feel like many of us that have done this work, some of it early on was really trial and error. And part of what we want to convey is that when you're doing this work, it's really important to document your ethical challenges and to use a reflexive approach so that other people, other novice investigators can really learn from some of the ethical encounters that we've had in our work. So I believe that there is certainly much more space to have these conversations about some of the pitfalls and challenges in the ways that we were able to circumvent those challenges, and sometimes even ways that we feel like we might have perpetuated stigma and marginalization in the research process because of our lack of awareness or knowledge of certain lived experiences and lived realities of populations that we work with.
Beautiful. I want to check in with my colleagues in just a second, but I did want to point out, I love the terminology each of you is bringing to the conversation today. And I'm just thinking about Alana, the humble and courageous, and then Faith, braver and bolder. It's wonderful energy. It's fabulous for us at this point. I mean, qualitative inquiry, of course, is not new, but to think about these types of energies that the two of you have brought forward is just such a wonderful enhancement to who we are and who we can be moving forward as responsible scholars. It's wonderful. So thank you so much for giving us those. Yeah, either Paul or Jeff, whoever wants to kind of, let us know what you're thinking and kind of what the conversation's inspired for, for you so far.
Sure. I'm kind of wondering about your thoughts regarding communicating our findings across different communities of knowledge, and the fact that, an academic paper can be very, as you've pointed out, can perpetuate stigma, and there's sort of power differentials kind of built into our writing. And I'm wondering how the course might kind of draw attention to just the challenges of communicating across a real diverse kind of, communities.
That's an excellent question. Alana, do you want for me to start?
Sure.
Okay, yeah, I can certainly speak from I would say that my work informs ways that investigators can more respectfully and ethically engage populations. I know some of Alana's work has been directly community driven and community engaged, and I think she can speak to that. I would say that I recently published a paper on abortion research in the post-Roe era. And what I would like to convey in this course is that we're talking about minoritized populations, and especially in this social, political, and structural climate, it relates to a lot of different topics. So my work began with HIV positive populations. I've also currently doing some work around ethical, legal, and social implications of engaging populations in genomics research. I work with trainees that have an interest in reproductive health, abortion, and other abortion-related issues. So what we hope to really convey is that there are similarities in thematic, I would say, harms across research, and by developing frameworks and thinking about frameworks that have been established by other scholars that we've collaborated with, even Black feminist scholars, other reproductive justice scholars, there is existing frameworks and guidance, ethical guidance that we want to really draw from.
Thank you.
Right.
I would so as someone absolutely who sees themselves as community engaged, rooted in the community, and seeing the importance of such qualitative research approaches as utilizing a community advisory board,
Mhm.
which is a group of individuals who have lived experiences, whether it's through a shared kind of illness experience, an advocacy experience, but it's through the utilization of a CAB that often becomes a powerful tool for doing the kind of research that I do. And so to start to get to the dissemination question, I'd say, in the past few years, particularly through being through my Robert Wood Johnson grant, I received the opportunity to think more creatively about the way that I disseminate my work, the way that I work in community with CABs and with other PIs to disseminate our work. And through that project, we really rooted ourselves in anti-oppressive methods such as using photo voice. And through photo voice, you're giving the agency back to your participants, because we know there's an incredible hierarchy and power dynamic that's flowing like water through research that we have to actively be working to disrupt. So with photo voice, our participants went out, took pictures, and really communicated these images of what community disorganization, violence looked like for them, and even how they experienced it. Something that's incredibly hard for people to talk about, their mental health and well-being. And through that project, we held an exhibit. We held a photo voice exhibit in the community that not just appealed to scholars, but appealed to community members. And we invited different kind of political stakeholders. And so that was an incredibly meaningful kind of dissemination tool that we use. We also developed a website and held community forums, and also produced an op-ed. So I really have to say, as researchers who are often trained to write that publication, get the journal article out, it's really important for us to think of the various ways that we can reach communities who have a vested interest in understanding the subject matter, but also having their voices amplified. And that's often not done in ways that are authentic, attuned, and responsive through just an article. So I think our course can absolutely talk about the ways in which alternative, important, and critical tools for dissemination can be powerful ways of producing change or facilitating change. And social justice, because I do think it's incredibly valuable, and there's many different kinds of tools that we can use that are also being recognized more now in academia.
Yeah, and I this is really even helpful in thinking about the framing of this work. So one of the things that we again hope to really convey in this course is that when we think about these research ethics frameworks, a lot of them are even qualitative research ethics frameworks are very focused on investigator expertise. And I know what Dr. Gunn and I have really learned in engaging communities is that we're in a co-learning process. We feel like that has really engendered humility, even about the ways that we think about and engage populations and think about expertise in the research process across the research process. So when I'm writing my articles, I really seek to center and prioritize community voice, stakeholder perspectives. I started off doing a lot of work and thinking coming into this work, I know the populations from a theoretical and a research perspective, but really engaging with them has, again, allowed me to see a much fuller perspective of people's reality. So I try to bring that, as Alana said, that voice, that perspective to the research, to research articles, to all, aspects of dissemination. And I think that's really important. And that translates to the ways that we talk about and discuss community. So the language, there are a lot of resources now when we talk about, we might not say marginalized populations, we might think about populations as being minoritized, and thinking more about the structural and the systemic ways that populations have come to be medically underserved or marginalized. So in some of my work, I actually draw from the American Medical Association. There's a language narrative guide that talks about health equity narratives, and a lot of the language, even in case studies or in published work, is really using language that's disparaging towards communities. So we want to make sure that people leave thinking about how are we using the language? Is this language perpetuating or mitigating harm amongst communities? Is it perpetuating or mitigating stereotypes amongst communities? So being very intentional and systematic about how we're referring to populations and how we disseminate information about populations. And I see the qualitative research process as being a place for that work to really start around authentic and empowering engagement.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent.
It's really beautiful. What's coming out today is this kind of posture for researchers, right? I love adding in this authenticity, humility to the words we already have. But another element that's just so strongly evident in the conversations that the two of you are putting forward, when we think about the first part of the title of the course, Advancing a Critical Ethics of Care, for that to be successful, there are underlying responsibilities that become the foundations for success. And the content of what you're bringing to us today really is serving to introduce the kinds of things people should give pause and be aware, understand the context, understand the day-to-day life, even the situations, not just of what people will bring to you that you'll analyze, but how will you comfortably set the stage, as you were talking earlier, Faith, for that data collection episode to occur. It's wonderful, and to know that folks will be made aware of how all of this runs hand in hand, all those kinds of responsibilities and shaping it. It's empowering. Yeah. I want to check in with Jeff, and I always have a couple more thoughts before we move to closing out in about another 10 minutes or so. But yeah, Jeff, let us know what's on your mind as you're listening.
Yeah, I think this follows the discussion we've just been having, but in your description, you mentioned there's a list of 3 core topics that direct content. And the second one is qualitative participants as experts, rethinking the moral authority of experience. Mm-hmm. And I just really like the way that's framed. It's kind of, to me, the way I interpret it is, traditionally the researcher is considered the authority, the expert, but really, if you think about it, the experts are the people that actually live and go through these experiences. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that. I think that's a really powerful statement in it, and it kind of turns things on its head a bit, which is always a good thing to do.
Yeah, I actually I'll refer in our course to an article that I wrote with colleagues around the moral authority of experience. And it's really drawing on work where we talk about the insider and outsider perspective. And I think there's 2 levels to this. As a Black female researcher, a lot of my work was with Black female populations, but Black female populations that experience social and economic marginalization. So again, going into these spaces, assuming there's this racial and even gender concordance, I quickly learned that there was a lot for me to really learn and draw from these populations, and that race and gender alone wasn't enough to say that I was an expert in anyone's lived experiences, because there were so many complexities and nuances that I wasn't aware of. So I say this to my students: a lot of us say we want to be health equity and health disparities researchers, and when I started doing this work and going to people's homes and really seeing how people lived and what the realities were, I was really struck by these experiences, so much so that I was concerned about being in some of these spaces. I was concerned about my own safety. So this is the piece when we talk about building humility and empathy and having this connect. as investigators with the communities that we actually serve. I feel like I quickly got schooled and learned a lot about what people actually experienced. And so I try to take that information and translate it in a way that highlights that even when we develop protocols for IRB review or protocols for our research studies, when we think about beneficence or harm to communities or even research autonomy, these principles have to be operationalized and really defined by the communities that we serve, by research participants. So I highlight in some of my writing, there's sometimes discordance between what a researcher might perceive as beneficial or harmful to a participant compared to what a participant might view. So we really have to prioritize participants' perspectives, and we will be having conversations about how this might translate in the research process. So in my experience, I had to defer to participants. So if a participant felt that a certain interview location was safe for them, even if I felt slightly unsafe in that environment, I deferred to the participant. So in some ways it put me in a position of feeling a bit uncomfortable, but that was just it's part of doing this work. And again, there's a need to document this more, to really expand our scholarship around being in these spaces. And many people have had these experiences and have learned from communities, and we need to write about it more. We need to document it more. So this is something that we're hoping that the learners in our course begin to document some of their experiences and what they've learned and how they've become more attuned to qualitative and just lived realities and complexities in the qualitative research process.
I would just to add a little. So I've done quite a bit of work with CABs, and part of my work with CABs has involved a community of individuals who I'm partnering with to look at the research questions, to even think through the kind of data that's collected, to think about the analysis, and yes, to be a part of the dissemination process. And I've been in meetings with the CAB members where we talked about not just the data, but also with our own kind of preconceived kind of understandings of these various phenomenon, such as incarceration, such as community violence. And through these co-learning experiences with CAB members, I, as a researcher, and I'd say my peers, also learned a great deal about really trying to be thoughtful in the ways that we're looking at these various kinds of phenomena that we may not have direct experience with, that are really important to really think about. And I've also worked with community partners who were co-PIs as researchers with me. And that experience was also very incredible. Learning about how the ways in which when you receive grants and how these various kinds of funding kind of mechanisms don't always play out or translate in the community the way that you would hope them to. Even to echo what Faith said, even thinking about the context in which we're doing the research, I and the other researcher who is in the field of public health, I remember us coming in thinking that we would hold the meetings, the interviews and focus groups in one kind of setting. And then when we partnered with our community partner who was a PI on the study, and really got a sense of all of the social, political conditions, the day-to-day, everyday, daily life experiences in the community, came to understand that our notion of the ways in which the research could be most beneficial really had a gap in its understanding. And so, working with a CAB and being challenged in those ways, and really meaningful, important, and critical ways, and also working with community members as researchers, has definitely highlighted and amplified the importance of them as experts. Yeah.
It's so great because you're really kind of pointing to this issue, which we try to remind people of all the time, is researchers put so much pressure to get the design right before anything begins, but each of you have given us these powerful stories of, as you enter, it's emergent discovery, you realize content that's directive to process. And you have to be open and flexible and prepared to adjust to make sure that the folks who are right there partnering with you and thinking, instead of just participants, thinking of folks as partners bringing their own expertise, that helps shape what you're doing so you can do what you're doing in a better way. As we wrap up for today, there's so much we could keep going, but out of respect for the flow of our days and things like that, I want to just kind of close with this. We like to ask you, as we close out, to envision the folks who will learn from you. And your course is on a Friday. We'll give people the weekend to kind of reflect, absorb, whatnot. But when they're coming back to their work on Monday, or maybe it may be, into their long-term future, if each of you could let us know something that you would hope someone integrates into their own work, kind of a firm take-home note, what would you hope that either on Monday when they're at their desk, or kind of into the future as they continue thinking through and doing the kind of work that you're putting forward? Yeah, what do you envision people integrating, and kind of hopeful that people kind of take steps toward?
I would say, I think the reflexive process that researchers must actively engage in is so critically important. And it's not just a checking off a box of, these are my identities. I've demonstrated I have a background in these experiences, but it's about constantly realizing that the research process and how we're interacting with it and how we're being experienced is fluid and it changes. And so I'd want folks to leave with being, and Faith said this so beautifully, this level of discomfort, to speak, I want to leave folks with leaning into this discomfort, leaning into understanding the ways in which they're constantly navigating the research process and thinking about the ways in which they're experiencing it and how their participants are experiencing them. Because I've written quite a few papers where that reflexive process was critical in writing the paper, critical in demonstrating rigor, trustworthiness, all of the things that we want to demonstrate in our qualitative work. So I want to leave folks with a desire and pursuit of leaning into this, let's say, discomfort of being reflexive, and and seeing it as a normal part of the process of doing rich qualitative work.
Fabulous.
I love that, Alana. And I would also, I want to add that this qualitative research ethics expertise is a niche area. So while we sort of stumbled, I would say, doing this work, we've been able to carve out, as Alana mentioned, somewhat of a professional identity around respectful, ethical, and trustworthy engagement. So that's one thing that I would hope that learners take away. Another thing is that there's spaces and there's a need to document these unanticipated ethical challenges, what we've learned from engaging participants, to really transform the way we think about qualitative research ethics. And we've done this successfully. And again, some of this work started with the Research Ethics Training Institute at Fordham, but many of us have expanded. We're now faculty members in the Research Ethics Training Institute, and there's space to publish this work in bioethics journals when we think about research ethics, qualitative research ethics, social science journals. So we will talk about some of the dissemination outlets that we've used, again, to help other investigators, especially novice investigators, navigate work with minoritized populations. And as I mentioned, this can relate to populations living with HIV. It's very relevant in terms of reproductive health right now, in terms of the social and political climate. It's relevant to ethical, legal, and social implications, ELSI related work. So there is a space to integrate these perspectives and these frameworks and guidelines into the grants that we write. Many funding agencies have an interest in understanding how to mitigate harm and to integrate more community voice and perspectives and stakeholder perspectives into the. So this work is fundable. There's a space and hopefully people will see that they can carve out their own professional identity and niche around learning more about qualitative research ethics and intersectionality.
It's beautiful. It's such a powerful outcome. And I just want to thank both of you, not only for today's conversation, but also for what you're bringing to the folks who will be learning from you. It's not just ethical responsibility, it's theoretically informed, it's, you know, guiding with methodological principle, attention to the other, attention to the lived experience of not just yourself, but the people who are there, respecting them. But I want to underscore another thing that comes out is the two of you are bringing such practical issues to researchers. So not only will they kind of get this kind of in their mind, but it'll help. And as an example, each of you gave such wonderful hints and tips today that tell people when it comes to dissemination, when it comes to getting out those things that you need for tenure and those kinds of pieces, it's not that you wait to the end and say, oh, I got to write something. And like Alana, you just went over this whole piece of kind of the reflexivity part and how that really helps you start thinking about, you know, kind of full cycle, what things will be. So thank you so much for everything you brought to us. August 2nd is going to be a packed day for the two of you. We really look forward to it. And welcome to our Qualitative Scholar team. Welcome to the Summer Intensive. We're so glad that we're to be working and partnering. We're proud of your involvement. And thank you so much for the conversation today.
Thank you for having us. We're excited about working on this.
So it's so great. Cool.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.